Today's video is sponsored by Stamps.com. If there's one thing every small business owner can relate to, it's that their business doesn't feel small to them. If you don't want to miss out on opportunities to grow your business and focus on your customers, you should really check out Stamps.com, the 24/7 online post office that's dedicated to saving you time, money and stress. Stamps.com lets you print your own official postage and shipping labels in seconds, so you can skip the trip to the post office and focus on taking your business to the next level. That's official postage for any letter or any package, anywhere you want to send it. Whether you're running a small office, a side hustle Etsy shop, or a huge shipping warehouse, Stamps is a real game changer. Their software lets you access all of the post office and UPS shipping services you need, and automatically selects the best USPS delivery options based on price, package size, weight, and required delivery date. Their service gives you access to exclusive discounts on UPS and USPS services all year round that you can't find anywhere else. We're talking up to 40% off USPS rates and 76% off UPS. Head over to stamps.com/lazymasquerade. Sign up for an amazing special offer that includes a 4-week trial, free postage, and a digital scale. No long-term commitments or contracts, just hassle-free postage on demand. Again, go to stamps.com/lazymasquerade and take advantage of that 4-week trial, free postage, and digital scale. Despite its relatively small size, Byron Bay is one of Australia's premier tourist destinations. Nearly 2 million people visit the coastal town each year. In 2019, 18-year-old Theo Hayez was amongst them. The young Belgian national was drawn to Byron for the same reasons as most travellers his age. The town's beautiful beaches, great surfing spots, and its chilled-out, relaxed atmosphere. For much of the year, backpackers and tourists make up the majority of Byron's population. It's a transient sort of town, a place where some people go to find themselves, and where others go to lose themselves. Unfortunately, in Theo's case, his trip to Byron was an escape from which he would never return. Theo had been exploring Australia for the better part of a year by the time he arrived in Byron. He'd spent much of his time down under with his cousin, Lisa Hayez, who described Theo as being a responsible and level-headed traveller. According to her, he wasn't that typical young tourist who loves partying, and was instead much more interested in experiencing Australian culture and immersing himself in the country's natural beauty. Still, meeting people and making connections is what travelling's all about, and since Theo didn't know anyone when he arrived in Byron, he got to talking with some other young people at the Wake Up hostel where he was staying. These fellow backpackers invited Theo to join them for some drinks in town. The young Belgian was scheduled to fly home to Europe the following week, so he figured, why not? One last adventure in Oz. On May 31st, Theo and one of his new acquaintances caught a shuttle bus into town. They were seen on CCTV at 7:45 PM, buying a bottle of wine and acting normally. They both then returned to the Wake Up hostel and shared the bottle with some other friends that they had made. Later that evening, Theo and his new companions went back into town once again and paid a visit to an infamous bar called Cheeky Monkey's, a short distance from Byron's main area. Now Cheeky Monkey's had something of a reputation at the time. It was ranked as one of the most violent bars in all of Australia, well known for its dodgy clientele, aggressive bouncers, and for the poor lighting in the surrounding area. Most of the locals knew better than to go there. But Theo wasn't a local, and nor were his new friends. With the end of May being somewhere between autumn and winter in Australia, it was obviously the off-season period, and as such, it was a particularly quiet night inside Cheeky Monkey's. In fact, the bar was only at about 1/4 capacity. Still, judging by the surveillance footage, Theo was having a fun time nonetheless, and was seen dancing on the bar with the other backpackers he had met. At about 11 PM, Theo bought 2 drinks at the bar, before promptly being escorted out the building by security. According to the guard who kicked him out, Theo was a polite young man, but had clearly had too much to drink and was stumbling all over the place. Other witnesses at the bar contradicted this though, and said that Theo was actually completely sober when he was kicked out, and wasn't being loud or rude or aggressive in any way. According to them, the security guard's decision to kick him out seemed completely random and unprovoked. Looking at the CCTV footage of Theo exiting the premises, he didn't appear to be intoxicated, though of course that's up for interpretation. The guard made him stand on an X to have his photo taken. Theo appears confused in the footage, but goes along with the whole rigmarole. At 11:07 PM, the security cameras captured Theo walking off by himself down Kingsley Street and into the cold, quiet night. This was the last time Theo Hayez was ever seen alive. After exiting the camera's field of view, he vanished off the face of the earth, never to be seen again. To begin with, everyone assumed that when Theo left the bar, he began walking back towards his hostel. That of course made perfect sense, seeing how his accommodation wasn't too far from town and he could have easily made the journey on foot. But as detectives would come to learn after analysing his Google location data, Theo never made it back to the Wake Up hostel that night. In fact, he didn't even get close. Soon after leaving the area, Theo sent a series of text messages in French to his friends back in Belgium. That's likely who he was messaging in this footage. At some point after that, he watched a portion of a TV show on YouTube and sent his sister a message on WhatsApp. On several occasions, he opened Google Maps to search for routes back to his hostel. Clearly, he was planning on heading back at some point. However, according to his mobile records, he actually took an extremely bizarre route after leaving the bar and walked in the opposite direction of the hostel, towards a youth activity centre down Tennyson Street. He then spent 7 minutes standing in a sporting field, a field where homeless people and drifters were known to stay. At 11:30 PM, he began walking extremely quickly through the Milne track towards Tallow Beach, moving at 7.5 kilometers an hour. With no streetlights in that part of town, it would have been very dark with no signs of life, and Theo would have been well aware that he was heading in the wrong direction and away from civilization. Still, as the data shows, he continued on through the thick bushland in a near straight line. Considering just how treacherous the bush along the Milne track is, that seemed like an almost impossible task, especially considering that Theo wasn't familiar with the area. As he made his way through the shrub, he never once slowed down and continued walking at a very fast pace. He finally exited the bushland and made it onto the beach, after which he began heading in the direction of Cozy Corner, towards Byron Bay's lighthouse. During all that time, Theo continued texting his friends and sister as if nothing was out of the ordinary. His messages were coherent and didn't give off the impression that he was distressed or in trouble. At 12:56 AM, Theo sent his final message to a friend he had made in Australia. Just 6 minutes later, his phone suddenly switched to sleep mode and stopped transmitting data. Strangely, his phone came back online at around 6 AM and connected to a cell tower in Cape Byron one final time at 1:47 PM. After that, his phone never pinged again. In the following days, Theo failed to call his family back in Belgium. That was completely out of character for him. He usually stayed in close contact with his parents, so they immediately began to sense that something was off. When June 6th rolled around and he still hadn't called, his family reported him missing. A huge search and rescue effort was launched. It involved helicopters, drones, cadaver dogs, trackers, divers, and even rock climbers. The local community even banded together, putting up missing person posters and helping hunt for the young man. Theo's parents flew out to Australia and made a passionate appeal for any information that would help them find their son. But by that point, the trail had already frozen over. They couldn't find a single trace of the young man anywhere. His passport and personal belongings were still in his private room at the hostel. In July, volunteers came across Theo's grey Puma baseball cap, nestled in the brush near Tallows Beach. So, what happened to Theo Hayez? Well, here are a few of the main theories. Theory 1. Theo left Cheeky Monkey's, and, for whatever reason, decided to go on a solo adventure through the bushland. He somehow made it to the beach, and began climbing up the beachside cliffs towards the famous lighthouse. This act of misadventure ended in tragedy, with Theo falling from the rocks and into the sea. His last known location was at Talos Beach after all, and it would explain why his body still hasn't been found. Then again, if Theo ended up in the ocean and was swept away or taken by a shark, how could his phone have reconnected at 1:47 PM and pinged off a cell phone tower? It's possible he dropped his phone before falling in the water, but that doesn't explain why the device still hasn't been found to this day, or why an otherwise sensible and risk-averse young man would do something so reckless and out of character. His inhibitions may have been lowered at the time, but as the CCTV footage shows, he almost certainly wasn't that drunk. Theory 2. Theo was murdered. It doesn't make sense that a young man with no knowledge of the local area would have been able to travel the Milne track alone at night. According to people who know the area, it's simply far too complex, dense, and difficult to traverse without knowing where you're going. And for him to have taken the unapparent detour towards Tallow Beach, well, that's an obscure route which only a local would know to take. You have to pass down a small path by a gully and an abandoned campsite, and it's not the kind of place you just stumble across. In the minds of many, Theo had to have met someone after leaving Cheeky Monkey's. A local, perhaps in the field where he spent 7 minutes standing around. This local then led him through the thick shrubbery of the Milne track with promises of showing him the lighthouse or taking him to a secret party. This local then either killed Theo, hurt him badly, or left him to fend for himself. It's unclear what their motive would have been, but again, human intervention would explain why his body was never found. It's entirely possible that Theo's buried out in the bushland somewhere, or that he was taken and driven somewhere even more remote. This theory would also explain why he took such a bizarre route. He likely wouldn't have gone in that direction if he wasn't being led by someone, and his text messages implied that he felt comfortable and not lost. Theory 3. Theo's Google Maps simply bugged out and gave him a bad route back to the hostel. Unfamiliar with the area, he followed Google's directions without question, assuming that the dark and desolate route must have been a detour. He unfortunately got lost, ended up on the beach, and then turned back the way he had come. Now, stuck wandering around the hostile bushland, he eventually succumbed to the elements. It was a particularly cold night after all, Byron's coldest May night on record in fact. His remains could still be out there somewhere, laying undiscovered, deep in the brush. This theory, however, doesn't explain why he never once tried to call for help, or why he didn't message anyone about his dire situation. There's a myriad of other possible theories that people have come up with. Someone gave him bad directions. He had wittingly or unwittingly taken some sort of substance. Someone stole his phone and ran off with it. All of these theories have their own set of merits and inconsistencies. Unfortunately, we simply don't know what exactly happened to Theo, though I think it's safe to assume he's no longer alive. But why did he take such a strange route? Why was he moving so quickly through the brush? Why did his phone enter sleep mode, only to reactivate hours later? And why has his body never been found? For his family's sake, I'm hoping we'll be able to answer those questions in the near future. If you know what happened to Theo, there's currently a $500,000 reward for any information relating to his case. If we're being honest, we all have a few skeletons in our closet, though of course, some of us harbour much darker secrets than others. For a few particularly sinister individuals, those metaphorical skeletons may actually be literal. For the incredibly wealthy and powerful, however, it just might be possible to have those old bones swept under the rug. Rebecca Zahau, 31, was leading the kind of life most people can only dream of. She could afford the most expensive designer clothes, dine out at Michelin star restaurants whenever she pleased, and spent the majority of her time socializing instead of working. But Rebecca hadn't always been rich. She came from a family of modest means, who all left their home in Burma and moved to the US in search of a better life. In 2008, Rebecca met Jonah Shacknai, the 54-year-old billionaire CEO of Medicus Pharmaceutical. Despite being 23 years her senior, Jonah took an instant liking to Rebecca, and the pair quickly began a relationship together. Oftentimes, Rebecca would stay over at one of Jonah's many luxurious homes throughout the country. On July 11th, 2011 for instance, she was staying over at Jonah's historic Spreckles mansion in Coronado, California, a large estate which he used as a summer house. She had brought her younger sister Zina along to marvel at the finer things in life. Also at the mansion that day was Max, Jonah's 6-year-old son from a previous marriage. Jonah himself was away on business, and Rebecca was watching over Zina and Max. It's unclear what exactly happened that fateful day, but at some point, young Max fell face first over a banister on the 2nd floor. His injuries were catastrophic. Rebecca, who claimed to have been in the toilet at the time of the incident, found Max several minutes later, unresponsive and not breathing. She performed CPR while her sister called for help. Max was rushed to the hospital, but the prognosis was bleak. He had a broken spine and brain damage due to oxygen deprivation. There was nothing more that could be done for him, and on July 16th, Max quietly passed away. Coroners determined that his fall was completely accidental, and the investigators on the case agreed, though it is worth noting that at least one doctor thought Max had been suffocated before his fall. But here's where the plot really thickened. On July 12th, the day after Max's accident, Rebecca drove her young sister Zina to the airport to catch a flight back to Missouri. After that, she picked up her boyfriend's brother, Adam Shacknai, who was in town and staying in one of Jonah's guest apartments beside the mansion. Rebecca, Jonah, Adam and a friend all went out for dinner together, after which Rebecca and Adam returned to the Spreckles estate. Jonah didn't join them, however, and instead met up with his ex-wife Dina to sit with their son, Max, who was still alive at that point. It's not known what Rebecca and Adam did once they returned to the estate, but neighbors reported hearing loud music coming from the mansion well into the early hours. At 6:48 a.m. the following morning, emergency services received a call from Adam Shacknai. Adam frantically explained how he had just found Rebecca's lifeless body hanging from a red rope off one of the mansion's balconies. Her hands and feet were bound, and she wasn't wearing any clothes whatsoever. After making that call, Adam sent his brother Jonah a text to tell him what had happened, and then cut Rebecca down before police and medics arrived, letting her body drop to the grass below. When the authorities arrived and examined the scene, they found Rebecca lying in the courtyard of the mansion, just below the balcony she had been dangling from, her ankles tied tightly together and her wrists constrained behind her back. It was later revealed that a blue, long-sleeved t-shirt was wrapped around her head. The shirt had been elaborately coiled over the noose 3 times and then tied around Rebecca's throat. The shirt sleeves had been knotted and stuffed into her mouth, gagging her. Inside the mansion, on a door leading to the balcony itself, detectives found the strangest clue of all. A bizarre note written in black paint. It read, "She saved him. Can you save her?" In the adjoining bedroom, they found the end of the rope which she had been hanging from, connected to the leg of a cast-iron bed. The rope itself had been tied using a cleat hitch knot and a slip knot. An autopsy later revealed that Rebecca had been alive when she plunged over the balcony. She perished sometime around 3 a.m. There were no substances in her system. Despite the suspicious circumstances surrounding Rebecca's demise, the detectives conducted what can only be described as a half-hearted investigation at best. On September 2nd, they officially ruled that Rebecca had taken her own life and staged the whole scene to look like a homicide. They theorized that Rebecca blamed herself for what happened to Max the previous day. Consumed by guilt, she then painted her final words on the door, tied a rope around her neck, attached the other end to the bed so that her spine would snap, bound her ankles and hands together, and, finally, launched herself over the ledge. They even released a video demonstrating how she could have tied her hands together to prove that the act was possible. And, just like that, they closed the case. But their conclusion just doesn't add up for a multitude of reasons. Many people, including forensic pathologists, instead believe that Rebecca was murdered by none other than Adam Shacknai, the brother of her boyfriend. Here's a list of their reasons why. First and foremost, Rebecca had restrained herself in a manner almost impossible for a person to do to themselves. Yes, the authorities released a video demonstrating how she could have bound her wrists, but their recreation conveniently left out a number of details. It didn't show how she then blindfolded and gagged herself with the t-shirt, or wrapped the elaborate noose around her neck. They also didn't explain why she would gag herself in the first place, nor why they initially held back information about the t-shirt itself. During her autopsy, 4 hematomas were found under Rebecca's scalp, injuries that had to have been made while she was still breathing. So, she either hit her head 4 times on the balcony as she fell, or, more likely, she had been struck by a blunt object and knocked out prior to her death. She also had defensive wounds on her arms and hands, the type a person sustains when trying to fend off an attacker. The DNA of a still unidentified person was found at the scene, meaning that somebody else was present when Rebecca died. Small amounts of blood and hair were found inside one of the mansion's showers, as were a pair of black gloves and a lone latex glove. None of this evidence was analysed by the authorities. Mud was found on the soles of Rebecca's feet, indicating that she had tried to escape the house while barefoot. Despite the mud, only 1 footprint was found on the balcony, meaning she had either hopped to her demise, or, more conceivably, she had been dragged or carried to the ledge. That would also explain why no mud was found on the bedroom carpet. There were shoe prints found on the balcony, both behind and on top of Rebecca's 1 footprint, which suggests that someone else was out there at the time of the incident. The marks and damage around Rebecca's neck were consistent with manual strangulation. Experts believe they had been made by a pair of hands and not by a rope. The rope itself had been tied using nautical knots used by professional sailors. Adam Shacknai worked as a tugboat captain. Sticky tape residue was found on Rebecca's calves, indicating that she had been more thoroughly bound before she met her end. Someone had removed this tape before her body was discovered. The clothes that Rebecca had been wearing before her life ended have never been located, so either she wasn't wearing any clothes to begin with, or somebody had stripped her of them and taken the garments for themselves. It's hard to believe that she would choose to end her life while not wearing any clothes at all. The cryptic message left on the door had been written in the third person, in handwriting that clearly wasn't Rebecca's, and at a height consistent with a taller person than her. Suspiciously, it's more likely that someone around Adam's height had painted it. The same black paint used to write the message was also found on the rope and on Rebecca's chest, though strangely, not on her hands or fingers. Someone had accessed Rebecca's computer at 3 AM, most likely after she had already perished, but before her body was discovered. It's unclear who used her computer or what they searched for. Jonah had left Rebecca a voicemail shortly before she died, but the message itself had been deleted and was unrecoverable. It's not known what Jonah said to her in that message, or even who deleted it. The entire event was recreated by a team of crime scene experts. When they threw a weighted dummy over the balcony, the bed it was tied to moved significantly. When investigators first inspected the scene, the bed had hardly moved at all. Co-conspirators may have been sitting on the bed when Rebecca was thrown over the ledge to weigh it down. Adam Shacknai, the man who had found Rebecca and cut her down, had Googled Asian bondage porn the night Rebecca died. That seems oddly coincidental, considering the state Rebecca was found in. A pair of women's underwear were also found inside his guest apartment. It's unclear who they belonged to, as they were never tested for DNA. The final piece of evidence that suggests foul play is that before Rebecca's body was discovered, one of Shacknai's neighbours happened to be recording an interview. On the unreleased audio, you can apparently hear screams for help coming from the Shacknai mansion. In this neighbour's words, the screams were clear. They weren't a muffled or far-off sound. Despite the official ruling that Rebecca had taken her own life, her family strongly believes that she was killed by Adam Shacknai, as well as by Max's mother and aunt, Dina Shacknai and Nina Romano. They assert that Nina and Dina blamed Rebecca for what happened to Max and hatched a plan to slay her. In their version of events, Nina and Dina went over to the mansion that night and demanded that Rebecca let them in. Sensing their anger, Rebecca refused to open the door, and so her boyfriend, Jonah, left her a voicemail telling her to let them in and chat things over. Rebecca complied. Nina and Dina entered, and, in a blind rage, attacked Rebecca and tied her up. Adam may or may not have been present at that point, but if not, he then came over from the guest house and helped Nina and Dina stage the whole scene. They began playing loud music to cover up Rebecca's screams, deleted the voicemail Jonah had left on her phone, and painted the strange message on the door. Adam then snuffed out Rebecca with his own hands, and the trio threw her over the ledge. Several hours later, Adam pretended as if he had stumbled upon the scene and called for emergency services. The family then either paid off the detectives working the case, or simply used their power and influence to make the whole debacle disappear. Indeed, Jonah Shacknai himself didn't seem too choked up about his girlfriend's sudden demise, and immediately hired a group of professional spin doctors to take the heat off him and his family. Still, that's just one of 100 different possible versions of events, and I'm interested to hear if you have any theories of your own. Whatever the truth, no criminal charges were ever filed against the Shacknais. However, Rebecca's parents did end up filing a wrongful death suit against Adam Shacknai, Dina Shacknai, and Nina Romano. Dina and Nina were cleared of any wrongdoing. But you know what? After examining all the evidence, the jurors ruled that Adam was indeed responsible for what happened to Rebecca, and awarded Rebecca's family $5 million in compensation. Now, it's important to note that civil cases aren't judged to the legal standard of beyond reasonable doubt, but are instead judged on the balance of probability. That's to say, it's entirely possible that Rebecca did end her own life, and Adam Shacknai won't be spending any time behind bars for what happened to her. But, in the eyes of that particular jury, it's more likely he was responsible for her death than not. I suppose that means if you had to put money on it, saying Adam Shacknai was involved in what happened to Rebecca is a safe bet. And who knows, if you won enough money in that wager, you too may just be able to afford the same luxuries as the rich and powerful. Expensive dinners, a huge mansion, and maybe even a get-out-of-jail-free card. A huge thank you to my supporters here on YouTube and over on Patreon, especially my biggest supporters. Punished Kratos, Hamish K, Nephus 1988, Lydia Glassley, That One Guy Thomas, Jessie Jug, Alex Greensall, Alicia Jagels, Anicra, Anya Yekaterina Faustov, Azrael Warakai, Beatrice Matarazzo, Charlie Lackey, Chief Cochuaque, Colin Monsma, Connor Louthan, Crawford K. McDonald, Expand Dong, Gina Valera, Grace Archie, Infamous-senpapi, Joseph Zisa, Leonardo Martinez, Makala May, Mackenzie Griffin, Myra Lancaster, Monica Mendoza, Nadine, Natalie Escobedo, Peter Loggerich, Philip Wester, Procupidine Netta, Taylor&Monica Gruenk, The Only Dorita, Zane, Mrs. Yvonne Rankin, The Deck of Cards, and TNS Mum. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. Be sure to smash that like button or I'll smash you, and you'll be hearing from me again very soon. Until then, you all stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark.